The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission welcomes you to our webinar entitled Assessment, Current Issues and Best Practices. Assessment refers to a variety of tasks by which teachers, lecturers, or instructors collect information about the performance and achievement of their students. Researchers emphasized that assessment has two purposes. One reason is for student learning, and the other reason is for certification. And that involves the evaluation of student achievement. It has been established by several authors that both formative and summative assessment fulfill the critical roles needed in assessment. As we continue here at J-TEC to operationalize the National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica, it is imperative that our qualifications meet our local standards and are aligned to the finest local and international best practices. Whether we are speaking about NQF standards in areas such as internal and external moderation, assessment evidence, integrity and transparency of qualifications, or broader issues related to assessment, it is critical that we ventilate the issues and learn from the best practices within our sector. This webinar is going to allow for experts to present to you and to engage you in a robust discussion on the various challenges and issues that we deal with in the 21st century as far as assessment is concerned. At this time, Dr. Black, our Executive Director and Commissioner, will greet us and welcome us to the webinar. Dr. Black.
Good morning, and thank you, Mrs. Seymour Hall. On behalf of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, I greet you well. I welcome all participants on the platform during this morning's webinar and those following us through our various social media platforms. I want to acknowledge the relevance, the timeliness of this morning's webinar as focusing on assessment best practices, the extent to which we have been able, through time, to coalesce around critical, needed assessment practices, but also an appreciation of the fact that there has to be change when it is that we consider the increased diversity of our learners, the diverse nature of the labor market and the extent to which employers and other individuals associated with employing labor are demanding more and a greater sense of what our learners can do and the extent to which they will be able to successfully recruit from the pool of persons leaving tertiary education institutions. I want to acknowledge, therefore, that this webinar will allow for discussion on key issues and challenges related to assessment in tertiary education and the exploration of innovative and creative ideas for meeting and satisfying the high standards, the rigorous demands of the 21st century market. We want certainly to explore the relationship between assessment and quality assurance. We stand on the cusp of some significant advances in artificial intelligence. Many of us are concerned at how this will impact our ability to assure quality, to assess critically learners and their competencies. What we are here today is to begin that conversation, well, rather continue, but certainly for us formally to begin this conversation around artificial intelligence and assessment and to share best practices. The webinar is timely. Changes in the profile and competencies, the composition of the person seeking further education opportunities, the different qualifications, profiles of learners, potential participants. As policy and institutional leaders, we certainly are evaluating and pursuing flexible learning pathway options in recognition of the increasingly diverse pool of learners. absolute importance is the need for all of us involved in tertiary education to be able to satisfy the demands, the needs, the requirements of the labor market and the persons that are desirous of professional advancement. The panel this morning is composed of a team of professionals with experience and current practice across the levels of the educational system. I'm certain that we will all benefit from hearing of their experiences, their thoughts, and certainly their professional advice. Having said that, I again greet you and welcome you to this panel, and the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission salutes and acknowledges your participation and your pursuit of knowledge and developing this knowledge to the benefit of all stakeholders. Good morning.
Thank you, Dr. Black. At this time, we are going to go straight into the first section of our webinar. During this section, each presenter will present to you for about 7 minutes on their particular area. We will then move into the second portion of our webinar, which is the panel discussion. And so at this time, I'm going to be introducing to you Dr. Nicole Manning of the Caribbean Examinations Council. Dr. Nicole Manning, just a moment. Dr. Nicole Manning is the Director of Operations and Examination Services at the Caribbean Examinations Council. She's an industry professional with over 20 years of regional and international experience in education. She has presented at various conferences in areas such as assessment, workforce development, risk management, and governance. Dr. Manning possesses a Doctor of Education from the Nova Southeastern University in Florida and a Master of Science in Computer-Based Management Information Systems from the University of the West Indies. She also holds executive qualifications from Harvard and Manchester universities. This has equipped her to provide executive leadership in the Examination Services Division at the Caribbean Examinations Council. Her dedication and focus in the area of education, in particular assessment, has provided her a platform to drive the digital transformation thrust of CXC, as she concomitantly realizes her passion for assisting young people in recognizing their true potential. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Dr. Nicole Manning as she presents to us on transforming assessment and qualifications for placement in higher education, current issues, and best practices. Over to you now, Dr. Nicole Manning.
Good morning, Mrs. Seymour Hall and participants. Just trying to, please allow me to share. Correct, thank you.
Dr. Nicole Manning will now share.
Okay. Just let me know if you're seeing my screen.
Yes, we are.
And you're seeing it in presentation mode?
Yes, it's in presentation mode.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so good morning to everyone, and I trust all is well. As we seek to review the concept of the issues and best practices as they exist in the region, but particularly looking at the transformation of assessment and qualifications for placement in higher education, I want to first begin with in the context that global competitiveness really can't, it's happening, it's real. And of course, as a Caribbean region, we're going to work together to make it happen for us. But the Caribbean Examinations Council play a very important part in this process as we develop the human capital of our people. And we do so through the partnerships and the various arrangements we have with various individuals. It is very important to note that we are aiming to ensure that as a region, we realize that kind of transformation that is necessary. And in so doing, I'm going to look at several areas. In particular, I want to start with the whole picture of the regional ecosystem, regional educational ecosystem. Before you, the focus is, of course, our workforce. Whatever we do, we have to remember that our workforce is of paramount importance. And so we are all players in ensuring that we have a global competitive workforce. CXC, along with the Ministries of Education, Social and other development partners, higher education institutions and associations like J-TEC, employers and other members who make up this economic space, we work together to make this happen. Very important foundation. However, we are conscious that the region faces many challenges. The quality of the workforce, one of the points made earlier by our commissioner. The slow technological advancement, one of the points I want to look at. Underutilization or limited capability for research and data analysis, an area that CXC wants to advance. Slow adoption or adaptation of new learning, teaching, and assessment strategies. And somewhat a very disappointing point, the rework and inefficient use of resources, where sometimes we do the same thing the same way, unfortunately expecting a different result. Now, important considerations for us as we have the dialogue this morning is to look at how we design and develop qualifications to ensure relevance and currency. Innovations that can be explored in the digital transformation of assessments. What are some of the benefits and challenges in this process of digitalization of assessments? And a question that needs to be answered, even though CXC is not directly involved in teaching and learning, but what are those adjustments that are required for the digitalization of assessments, given the fact that it happens both during the teaching and learning space as well as a part of the summative assessment process. This ongoing digitalization of assessment is key for us to look at in relation to what is happening with the future of education. Now, there are many opportunities and new ways that CXC has embarked to ensure that we deal with not only the challenges I've identified, but also to capitalize on some of the benefits that present themselves to us as a region and as a player in the global sphere. One, the creation of a skills and competency framework, qualification management and assessment and recognition are three key components. And of course, everything sits on that skills and competency framework. But we are putting to the table that it's important that the whole bit of the digital transformation is critical for us as a region if we are going to move forward with the aggression that is necessary for us to survive. First and foremost, as I mentioned, the design and development of qualifications to ensure relevance and currency. We at the Caribbean Examinations Council, like others, I trust, are looking at creating greater opportunities for our human capital. And as such, we would have created our CXC product innovation model. And this model has three components: a classic, hybrid, and proximate models. Now, the classic component looks at standard CXC design and development of qualifications and assessment. The hybrid component looks at when we CXC partners with clients to develop a customized qualification and assessment to ensure that we are being very continuously relevant. And of course, last but not least, to ensure that the national curriculum, as the case may be, ensuring that equivalence and recognition and certification of individuals. So as I look at what exists within the sphere, this is the first response to the issue we have in terms of the quality of our workforce. We cannot be prescriptive in terms of just one area of what we're going to provide to our workforce, but providing many solutions across this model is what is going to answer that question or that issue of the quality of our workforce. Secondly, the quality assessment and certification through the digital transformation is also very critical, creating, again, opportunities and new ways of assessment as learning, for learning, and of learning. As I mentioned previously, the summative assessment, we also embark on formative assessment. You all know that too well regarding the areas we know about the school-based assessment, performance-based assessment activities, and more so prior learning assessment and recognition mechanism. Now, this is it's a newer component for the latter two areas of the model that I mentioned previously. But of course, very importantly, and I know that J-TEC, our host, would know all too well that whatever we do, quality assurance is very critical. We have many tiers of quality assurance within our systems, but I'm only going to mention two components in focus of what we are discussing. Moderation of the assessments to ensure consistency of the results that we provide across the region, as well as quality assurance of whatever we do to ensure that the products, that the results that are issued, especially under our hybrid and proxy components, are ensured that we have to ensure that they adhere to the agreed protocols of delivering, of the training delivery and assessments. As a high-stake awarding body, assessment strategies as well as quality assurance is very critical for us as we embark on this transformation. Now, of course, while we would have had our generic way of operating, as I mentioned before, innovation is key for CXC. Key for us as we create new products, but also key for us as we create new opportunities and new ways, again, for capturing evidence in terms of skills and competencies. We are encouraging the facilitation of peer interaction, group performance, collaboration, and above all, allowing candidates to create their own profile from our suite of products. In order to do so, CXC has created what you're seeing on screen as our digital transformation strategy. And as you're seeing, we have here presented before you 8 main components of this strategy. And I'm not going to go into details because this could be a presentation by itself, which of course we can have the opportunity to do. But just to note, of clear importance are the innovations that need to be explored, that we have explored in the digital transformation of our qualification management and assessment delivery. This spans every area from product development through to our question bank, our assessment development, all the way through to the issuance of result. Happy to say that we were able to provide timely and immediate response to our candidates who would have been able to advance in terms of their movement to higher education, employment, or entrepreneurship for this year, for last year, 2024. Pulling together the benefits that we are provided in relation to the various areas in our product innovation model, as well as the digital transformation of assessment, I want to share with you to our content acquisition, to share that we have created a solid foundation. And in that solid foundation, CXC is providing micro, intermediary, and macro credentials that will be pulled from our CXC's expanded qualification suite in order to allow persons to create their own CXC wallet of certification, their own learner profile. How could I end without speaking a little about artificial intelligence in this transformation process? CXC has created its own AI policy framework, which will be rolled out this year, as well as to highlight the need to embrace AI in context. Teaching and learning, AI will play, and we are sure that it has already started to play a very important part in teaching and learning. We are encouraging educational professionals to keep abreast with those technological advancements, but more so to encourage access to information, facilitate independent inquiry, as well as to facilitate the creation of their own adaptive, personalized learning experiences. For assessment, it's very important that we understand through AI that it has provided requires greater attentiveness to the appropriate use of formative and summative assessments. Let me hasten to say, as we embrace AI, ethics, equity, and the ensuring that the facilitation of assessment for learners to think critically stands as key. Hence, CXC is creating standards and guidelines for the use of AI in assessment. We do expect that the region will share in utilizing these guidelines as well as develop their own AI policies in line with CXC's AI policy framework. Last but not least, the power of partnership for transformation is key for us. And as CXC has its own partners, we do know our stakeholders have their own. So the benefits of digital transformation and the transformation, as I would have outlined, provision of current and relevant data to our policymakers, enhancement of learning opportunities, increased access to our regional candidates wherever they are in the world, data security, increased operational efficiencies across the education process, most importantly, current and innovative products in line with labor market demands, as well as this increased flexibility for our learners. Colleagues, 2020 pushed us to beyond the place we were ready to go. However, we cannot approach digital transformation as a mere response to this issue, but as a consciousness of the value it will create. My last recommendations I will make is for the strategic educational transformation to facilitate the digitalization, not only the facilitation of the products from CXC, but also what exists in your own space. Data analytics and the use of same for decision and policy making. Last but not least under this area, financing and planning for digital transformation, including AI, is very critical. I put to you the need for the open door policy for all students, allowing them to create their own graduate profile, as I would have shared earlier, allowing parents and students in collaboration with institutions to do so, and for them to be empowered to move to the next level, whether it be further education, employment, or digital transformation, or entrepreneurship, The balance is critical for regional transformation. CXC is providing the right products at the right time using the best strategies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that was quite a presentation from CXC. She looked at the digital transformation strategy and the leaps and bounds that are being made in assessment by the Caribbean Examinations Council. Assessment, quality management assessment strategies, all of those were discussed, and looking as well at the QA arrangements that support these assessment strategies. I was also happy to hear that we have both macro, intermediate, and micro credentials, and all of those go together to create a wallet of qualifications. And so all of these new developments at CXC, we are excited to hear about them. We're also excited to hear that there are standards and guidelines being developed to support artificial intelligence. And so, Dr. Manning, we thank you so much for that presentation once more. And I'm sure that during our panel discussion segment, there will be many questions and many comments on all of these wonderful things that are happening at the Caribbean Examinations Council. Many persons have joined us since we started, and we'd like to welcome you all. Welcome to our webinar. We are looking today at assessment, current issues, and best practices. Our next presenter today will be Miss Ingrid Faulkner, and she is the acting senior director at the NCTVET. Let us welcome her. She's going to be presenting to us today, and her focus is going to be on TVET alternative assessments, current issues, and best practices. Now, Ms. Ingrid Faulkner, she is the acting senior director at the National Council on Technical and Vocational Education and Training. Her professional experience spans human resource, marketing, health, life insurance, information technology, data analytics, and TVET. She has 20 years of experience across various areas in the TVET system, which includes monitoring and evaluation, quality assurance, and has overarching responsibility for ISO quality management systems at the NCTVET. She holds a Commonwealth Executive Master's in Business Administration from the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean, a Bachelor of Science degree in Management Studies from the UWI, and a diploma in Computer Studies. And she's currently pursuing a postgraduate diploma in Education and Training. She's an accomplished practitioner in TVET who has a passion for young people, assisting them in realizing their goals. Ladies and gentlemen, once more, let us welcome Miss Ingrid Faulkner as she presents to us on TVET alternative assessment. Over to you, Miss.
Your mic is mute. I'm sorry about that. Good morning, good morning, good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here, and I will get right into it since we are on time. I was asked to present, or I'll be presenting today on TVET alternative assessments, current issues, and best practices. Now, let's just define or look at what is TVET. So TVET, or what it does, it actually equips learners with practical, technical, and vocational skills to meet industry demands. What is TVET assessment methodology? TVET assessment gives precise feedback on whether the learner has successfully attained learning outcomes using methods such as portfolio development, projects, questioning, performance-based evaluation, which could be simulation or on-the-job workplace evaluation. What are alternative assessments? Well, alternative assessments, it's assessments that go beyond traditional written, focusing on practical skills and real-world applications. And the key feature for this type of assessment is real-life relevance, focus on outcomes and competencies, and interactive and dynamic evaluation tools. And some examples are portfolio, simulation, peer and self-assessment, work-based assessment, and of course, practical demonstrations. Now, why do we focus on alternative assessment? Why? Because traditional tests often fail to evaluate hands-on, that's demonstrative skills effectively, and alternative assessment provide a holistic evaluation of measuring practical, cognitive, and soft skills. Shortcomings, though, of course, with everything there are shortcomings, and so alternative assessment is no different. It is resource constraints, that's limited funding for tools, and not just tools and equipment, but also up-to-date tools, currency of these tools, industry collaboration, weak alignment with workplace needs, of course, and also Far more learners are in training, which presents a challenge for the industry to assist. Assessor bias and competence, and that this leads to unfair evaluation, technological gaps, limited access to digital tools, currency of tools, virtual reality simulators. Another shortcoming is facilities. Simulation does not mimic, in these facilities that we have currently, simulation does not mimic all components of the industry, and that can present a challenge. Stigma, of course, that's a long-standing shortcoming. Lack of knowledge and understanding of TVET. More promulgation by policymakers and administrators and society as a whole is needed. Insufficient experts to deliver, coach, and mentor, and scalability. Difficulty in implementing at scale in jurisdictions where automation and standardization of assessments are absent or limited. Importance of alternate assessment in TVET. It's holistic. The holistic evaluation captures practical, soft, and critical thinking skills. It fosters creativity. It's aligned to industry. It ensures graduates meet employer requirements. Student engagement. It boosts the interest of the students through interactive assessments. And of course, it promotes lifelong learning, which encourages reflections and skills development. We could not do this presentation without looking at AI. The benefits of AI in alternative assessments: it improves efficiency and accuracy, and which reduces human error. It minimizes bias in assessment. It increases accessibility. It also allows for assessment of large number of learners, which is scalability, and it's a complementary tool for assessment. The impact, automation of assessments. Of course, we love that. Automation of assessment. Formulate the assessment based on the candidate's assessment needs. That's customization, personalization of assessment. Skill-based evaluation. It helps with real-time feedback. So once you get your results as you complete the assessment, it also assists with data-driven analysis of learners' performance to identify their skills and weaknesses and provide feedback. But with everything, there is a disadvantage. And so disadvantage of AI is lack of human judgment, like emotional intelligence. It stifles creativity because the learners will look to using the AI without trying to understand the information. It's not tailored to cultural differences. Its incorrect use can result in undesirable outcomes, and learners can become dependent on technology to solve their problems. Best practices for alternative assessments. We have competency-based framework aligned with measurable learning outcomes. We have the integration of technology. We use e-portfolios and virtual reality simulation. We can look at collaborative design with industry, ensure workplace relevance, training assessors, equipping educators with modern methods of assessment. Diverse formats combine peer assessment, self-assessment, and project or research-based assessment to get the holistic response or the holistic assessment of the learner. And of course, real-time feedback, provide immediate constructive feedback. Recommendations for effective implementation. Capacity building, that means train assessors in modern methods. Industry partnerships, co-develop tools with industry leaders. Invest in technology, equip TVET centers with digital tools. and pilot programs, test alternative assessments before scaling up. I did not include standardized guidelines for assessment in TVET, as this already exists in Jamaica, but standardized guidelines are also important. Conclusion, key takeaways. Alternate assessments are vital for competency-based systems. It's addressing challenges requires innovation, collaboration, and investment to address this situation. Best practices ensure graduates are job ready and meet industry standard. So call to action, what we need to do is make a commitment to improving assessment techniques to ensure that TVET education is future-proof. And that's my look at TVET alternative systems. Assessment, sorry.
Thank you so much, Ms. Faulkner. And so we learned so much about TVET alternative assessments through that presentation, looking at the various ways in which it can be conducted, portfolio development projects, on-the-job learning, looking at the fact that many times our traditional means of assessment are not successful at reaching every learner. And so we must ensure that we have room for alternative assessments. She spoke, though, about the fact that because of the cost and the general lack of appreciation at times, alternative assessments may not be used, but there are so many benefits. It fosters creativity, it's relevant to industry, and of course, it promotes lifelong learning. She also made mention of the fact that if we are going to improve our offerings at the TVET level, then we must train our assessors in alternative assessments. We must ensure that we forge the partnerships that we need and we invest in technology. Those are just some of the ways. So, of course, we thank you once more, Ms. Faulkner. That was quite a presentation, and we look forward once more to the discussion later. For persons who are trying to join via Zoom, you may join via YouTube if you're not able to get into the room. I know the room has filled up really quickly. And so we encourage persons to join us on YouTube, join us on Facebook, and all the other platforms that J-TEC has. We are broadcasting on those platforms as well. So don't worry if you're not able to get into our Zoom room. And so at this time, we're going to move on to our third presenter, and that presenter is Mr. Paul St. Ledger Cox. Mr. Paul St. Ledger Cox is an accomplished educational measurement specialist with 14 years of professional experience spanning the fields of healthcare and education in Jamaica. He holds a bachelor's degree in physical therapy and a master's degree in educational measurement, both from the University of the West Indies, Mona, currently serving as the Director of Assessment and Examinations at the Council of Community Colleges in Jamaica. He plays a pivotal role in shaping assessment practices across the community college network. His research interests focus on classroom assessment, science misconceptions, and student learning. And this reflects his passion for improving educational outcomes and fostering meaningful learning experiences. And so we are going to get a taste of Mr. Cox's passion this morning as he comes to us to speak on the topic safeguarding and conducting assessments in the digital age at higher education institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Mr. Paul Cox. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. I'm just getting my screen up to share. 1 minute, colleagues. All right. Sorry about that, colleagues. Are you now with me? Hello?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Awesome.
Here we hear.
Awesome. And you are able to see my screen?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
I am.
All right, awesome.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Today I will discuss the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica's CCCJ perspectives on safeguarding and conducting assessments in the digital age. I encourage your focused attention. Feel free to ask questions and provide your insights at the end of the session. Good day, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Today I will discuss the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica's CCCJ perspectives on safeguarding and conducting assessments in the digital age. I encourage your focused attention. Feel free to ask questions and provide your insights at the end of the session.
Right. So, colleagues, are you seeing my screen at this time? I just want to ensure.
Yes, we are.
Awesome.
Sure.
No, the task is mine to bring to your attention an overview of what has been happening here at the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica and the colleges and polytechnics that we currently serve in the island. Now, there has been, over the last 2 years, a policy shift. We have received a mandate from our council to focus our assessments primarily on digital assessments and authentic assessment. We have evaluated what has been happening over a number of years with respect to traditional paper and pencil testing, and where it is that the labor market and the needs for the 21st century learners would be better prepared for. And we think the movement to digital and authentic assessment is where we ought to be taking our learners. So that has been the focus of the Secretariat over the last 2 years. In conjunction with our Office of Curriculum, Instruction and Innovation, the mandate has been to ensure since 2023, all of the programs that are owned and governed by the Council of Community Colleges take on a more authentic assessment, digital assessment, with how it is that the curriculum is designed and later on the students are assessed. Now, what we have realized over the since COVID, to be honest, is that there are a number of institutions that are offering online instruction, and by offering online instruction, the assessment then follows. Now, we have realized that quite a number of our students have gone on overseas and are studying overseas, but have still the need to access their community college education. So we want to ensure that we are meeting them exactly where they are, and our students are able to access both instruction, asynchronous and synchronous, as well as to do their assessments within the online space. Now, we have come to this conversation about safeguarding our online assessments, and it is a key tenet in the assessment process. Now, there are several strategies that can be employed to improve academic integrity and security. And the first one out is that of assessment design. Colleagues, here at the Secretariat, we think it's best, and based upon what has been published, is to ensure that we create assessment pieces that the students can produce and promote originality. That has to be the focus of our assessments going forward. we realize, colleagues, that content can be easily accessed. Students can access content from different online resources, physical resources. What they need help with is how to manage that content and how to articulate that content and to seamlessly integrate it within the labor market. We realize, based upon reports that we get from our local accreditation bodies, that the labor market, the persons in the industry are saying that, boy, our students are content rich. They are content rich, but where they are lacking is in the skills that are needed to effectively maneuver and carry out their day-to-day operations. So here at the council, we have taken a very bold approach with respect to assessment and trying now to put the necessary frameworks in place to ensure that our students are not only labor market ready, but they're able to comfortably operate within the 21st century. So assessment design is critical, producing original work, and also it encourages the students to critically analyze and to critically think and to incorporate that information into novel situations and contexts. A lot of our students leave different higher education spaces and they are devoid of applicability skills. They must be able, when they leave, especially the community college network here in Jamaica and within the region, to be able to articulate and to be able to produce meaningful work and to contribute meaningfully to society. Another method through which we can safeguard our online assessments, colleagues, is that of proctoring. Now, proctoring is a multi-million-dollar industry, and the acquisition of proctoring solutions sometimes presents as a limiting factor. Institutions oftentimes don't have the necessary capital to safeguard and procure proctoring solutions, but it is something that has to be thought of and to be integrated seamlessly within the online spaces. Now, institutions also provide their own nuanced experiences with respect to online assessments and services. So it has to be taken from an institutional level as to which approach should be taken. Is it artificial-based proctoring versus live monitoring? Both of which have their strengths and also their weaknesses, but it comes back down to which is that we will be evaluating and monitoring our students. Here at the Secretariat, we have a judicious blend of both the live monitoring, and we are now in conversations to introduce artificial intelligence-based proctoring. Colleagues, we are at the cusp of cutting edge with respect to proctoring and evaluating students in the online space. It is important for us to understand that the necessary integrity aspect of students' work. So institutions now will have to ensure that the policy frameworks are not only shared with their students, but there are periodic checks to ensure that students are familiar with the content, they're familiar with whatever violations and what the violations stand for with respect to coursework submission or final paper examination submissions. Now, it is important that all of these things are documented so as to ensure that the necessary systems are in place. Digital inequities in terms of a challenge. We have heard the conversation about a digital divide that exists. Now, I wanted for us to consider also within this space, not only the digital divide with respect to access to internet, access to laptop, or various technological devices, smartwatches, etc. But I want us to pause long enough to consider the applications on these devices, the software and the hardware, because they in of themselves also provide some inequities. And these inequities, colleagues, also regrettably introduces into the scoring mechanisms what we refer to within measurement circles as construct irrelevant variances. Because, colleagues, if it is a student has a device and they're trying to access an online exam, but it is not compatible with the learning management system that is in place, that too provides some inequity. If it is that the device needs a particular software or keyboard and the student only has access to a cell phone, that also provides some amount of inequity and also some invalid score interpretations when we get to that point. So I wanted to bring to our attention the aspect of digital inequities, not only concerning connectivity issues, access to internet, power, etc. But we also have to contend with the devices that the students have. And I can share here that there are a number of students within our community college network that they don't have access to computers or laptops. So sometimes they access their classes from their cell phones, and that in and of itself poses some constraints. I know that there are community colleges and polytechnics within the CCCJ that provides spaces for their learners to come on the campus and to utilize their ICT rooms and access their classes and do their exams from that spaces. But I wanted to bring to this table for consideration the focus on hardware and software. Also, colleagues, there is an unfamiliarity with the digital and online testing platforms. Oftentimes, the first time students are accessing an online platform is when they're doing their summative high-stakes final exams. We are advocating its use throughout the academic year. While when it is used throughout the academic year, you are better able to pick up on some technical issues, software issues, issues with the students. We want to ensure that we minimize the errors that the students go in the exam with, that they experience in the exam, and also errors in terms of scoring. So we're advocating to ensure that the students use these online testing platforms right throughout the academic year. So if it is an in-class test, if it's a mid-semester, if it's a classroom presentation, utilize the digital platforms. Colleagues, oftentimes there are poorly designed assessments that fail to accurately measure students' learning outcomes. And my colleagues after will spend a greater deal in terms of exploring this. But I wanted to bring to our attention that how it is that we design, implement, administer, and score online assessment, it has to be vastly different. It has its own metrics and nuances as opposed to that of traditional testing. Colleagues, authentic assessments are relevant. Colleague Faulkner spent considerable time exploring authentic assessments. We believe that students are better served when they are able to be immersed in terms of producing skills that mirror what they are expected to produce in the labor market. So we want to prepare our learners for the labor market with the requisite applied competencies. Colleagues, we have to get to a point where our students are able to hit the ground running within the labor market, or if it is that they decide to pursue their entrepreneurial skills and mindsets. Authentic assessments, colleagues, it emboldens and sharpens critical thinking and problem solving. It is one of the crucial tenets of the teaching and learning process to have our learners critically analyze novel content and novel situations. So assessment is almost at the tail end. So our curriculum has to be so developed to ensure that the assessments can match. And certainly here at the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica, our very own Office of Curriculum Instruction and Innovation, given the mandate from our council, from our secretariat, have been championing this in terms of their curriculum development and review processes, because all programs post-2023 now have to look somewhat like what I'm presenting here now in terms of critical thinking, analyzing, linking the content to applied competencies and the labor market. So my colleagues here, they have engaged subject matter experts, they have engaged externals to really pretty much spin our existing curriculum so that it matches what obtains currently and futuristically. Colleagues, aligning assessment strategies with the industry demands is of paramount importance, which is why we here at the Secretariat, we rely heavily on our industry partners, because it is they who will articulate to us and share with us, especially when tracer studies are done from our students who leave with our bachelor's degrees or postgraduate degrees and our certificates. We get the tracer studies or get access to the tracer studies to show us what it is that our industry partners are demanding. So we are now actively aligning our assessment strategies and our curriculum with what obtains in the industry. Colleagues, let us pause to reflect and to understand with respect to the next steps. Policy guidelines have to be established and technical frameworks. The Council of Community Colleges, we currently have a draft policy with concerning artificial intelligence use within our community college network. It is important that higher education institutions fashion and model, develop their own artificial intelligence policy. It is not sufficient to have a plagiarism policy or an academic integrity policy document. A standalone artificial intelligence policy ought to be developed and translated throughout our institutions, all higher education institutions in Jamaica. The training of faculty is also important with respect to assessment, with respect to curriculum design and online assessment. Colleagues, when we speak about faculty, oftentimes we shy away from the inclusion of the support team, and we focus primarily on academic faculty. But the support team or ICT team plays an integral part, or learning management administrators or system administrators ought to be part of the conversation, because they too can go through the nuts and bolts in terms of monitoring the platforms, as well as the proctoring aspects of assessment. Establish a student digital literacy program, because we oftentimes take for granted, because our students have the devices, they know how to effectively maneuver and effectively use it. We can't take it for granted, so it is best that we structure and have something in place for them to be au fait with the different learning management systems and platforms. Colleagues, there ought to also be continuous monitoring and evaluation of our assessment security. Data breaches happen minutely, hourly, secondly, and we always have to ensure that we have systems in place and backup systems in place to ensure that there is continuous monitoring. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to advance to us colleagues in terms of collaboration with industry partners for immersion into the labor market. We can't do it alone. We don't operate in silos. So we think it's best to forge linkages so as to better prepare our students. Also, promote the signing of articles of association and reciprocity agreements around digital assessment practices. It doesn't make sense for institution X to be operating vastly different from institution Y. Colleagues, we have a similar goal. We want to ensure that our learners and our students at large are better able to function and to function independently. So it doesn't bode well to continuously reinvent an existing wheel, where there are best practices that are within institutions. Institutions ought to be at liberty to share those best practices and to forge and form linkages so as to strengthen and to assist other institutions. And finally, from me, colleagues, with respect to the adoption of technology, the adoption of learning management system, the adoption of online assessments, there are a myriad of online teaching and learning platforms. But what will effectively separate institutions and academic faculty is its implementation and the necessary supporting framework and policy guidelines for them to operate seamlessly. Colleagues, thank you so much for listening and engaging in this presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paul Cox. Quite an engaging and interesting presentation there. And we've learned so much about safeguarding or assessment. And of course, he spoke about the fact that we have shifted from traditional paper and pencil testing to digital and authentic assessments. And so it is critical that as we have an increasing number of institutions using online assessments, that the necessary procedures and practices are in place. He gave an example of proctoring solutions, which may be AI-based proctoring or live monitoring. He also spoke about the challenges in safeguarding online assessments. And some of these include questions about academic integrity, digital inequities, unfamiliarity with the digital or online testing, as well as poorly designed assessments. And we know that if our assessments are not in line with our learning outcomes, then we cannot achieve the desired outcomes that we want. We cannot use those assessments effectively. And there are several recommendations that we have, looking at our policies related to technological frameworks, our training system as it relates to our faculty, as well as how well we're able to establish student digital literacy. We must continuously monitor and evaluate our assessment security and ensure that we're collaborating. How can we develop qualifications if we're not collaborating with our industry partners, not just to establish our learning outcome set standards, but also our assessments in order to ensure that they are authentic? And so we thank you so much for those and other points that you made, Mr. Paul St. Ledger Cox. Our next presenter. Oh, and by the way, I see your comment, Judith Go. She's telling us that she's very appreciative of the presentations so far. They're very informative. So let us continue to encourage others to join. You may join on J-TEC TV if you're unable to access the Zoom. And so we are going to be moving on now to our next presenter. And our next presenter is Clavia McBean. She has over 17 years of teaching experience at the secondary and tertiary levels. She has published mixed methods, quantitative, qualitative, and conceptual research on various assessment-related issues, including how large-scale assessments may be optimized for measuring sustainable development competencies and validity and reliability issues related to school-based assessments. Finally, she has also developed and executed assessment training workshops to respond to educational changes in the region, including implications for practice, considering advancements in artificial intelligence such as ChatGPT. Let us welcome Dr. Clavia Williams McBean. She's from the School of Education at the University of the West Indies. She's going to be speaking to us on assessment and quality assurance, current issues, and best practices. Welcome.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for the invitation. I will just jump right into my presentation. Certainly, where I want to start is by looking at what does it mean to have quality education. Now, quality education is about equipping our learners with the skills, the values, the competencies that they will need to function in society. And as the values and the attitudes and the skills in society change, education is supposed to change to respond to those things. Now, what is it that our society currently needs? Looking at the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report for 2023, they've highlighted the top 10 skills that the society or industry players say they need. We see analytical skills, we see creative thinking, we see resilience, flexibility, and agility. We see systems thinking, which is a sustainable development competence, customer service, AI, technological literacy. Now, if we want our education system to be deemed as quality education, then the education that is delivered in these institutions must encompass a holistic approach to learning that aims to empower individuals with the knowledge, the skills, the values, and attitudes necessary for them to thrive. And if we do, then the world would literally be in their hands. So how does assessment feature into all of this? Now, in order for us to determine the efficacy of the investment that we're making into education, we need assessment. And assessment is the bridge between teaching and learning. So the effectiveness of what a teacher is doing in the classroom, be it a teacher educator at the tertiary level or a teacher at the early childhood level, we need to know that learning is taking place. And we can only know that learning is taking place if we assess them. But assessment cannot play this role if the assessment methods, the procedures that we're using are not in line with what is acceptable in terms of test construction or assessment policies. Now, I'm going to focus briefly on a few current issues and the best practices or solutions or recommendations to each. The first issue is inadequate teacher preparation. It is reported the world over and in Jamaica that teachers are inadequately prepared for their assessment responsibilities. And that goes from the teacher education level all the way down. Now, if they're unprepared, it means that it calls into question the inferences we're making from the results of any sort of assessment that would be created, because if the assessment is flawed, then when we say that a student has failed or the student doesn't have the requisite competence, then that is also going to be questioned. So what do? We need better teacher preparation and professional development for our teachers, and my colleagues will also echo this. Specifically, in terms of improving teacher training and professional development towards improving the assessment competencies of teachers, we need to include formative assessment training. My study that I've just put out has shown that formative assessment has improved students' learning in English in secondary schools in Jamaica, and that's across the board. Teachers also need training in test construction. Teachers create tests every day, be it at end of unit or end of class test. It's also an assessment instrument. And based on those tests, teachers then say that their objectives were met, students have accomplished. But if the assessment isn't aligned with what your objectives are, then of course, we cannot say with any sort of confidence. So teachers need to be prepared to construct the tests that they will be using in the classroom. Teachers also need to be prepared for their assessment responsibilities in school-based assessment. Dr. Manning has spoken about school-based assessment, and the CXC's mandate is to include school-based assessment because of its value in all its examinations. But in teacher education institutions, not many are preparing teachers for how they should implement school-based assessment. We have an assessment course specific for school-based assessment at the UWI, and year after year, students complain that they didn't know this and they didn't know that before they came, but they have been preparing students for SBAs before. And when the CXC implemented school-based assessment in English and mathematics in 2018, I conducted a study on teachers of English in Jamaica, and they shared that they were not prepared. Similar reports came from a study from Juggernaut et al. In Trinidad and Tobago, looking at teacher preparation for mathematics. If the teachers aren't prepared, then the assessment results that we're getting from CXC can also be questioned. So we need to look into how each part of the system help to make the system more accountable. And of course, differentiated assessment is something that teachers need to be prepared for. Teachers also lament that they're taught to differentiate instruction without differentiated assessment. And if there is this sort of misalignment or mismatch, then of course the instruction is not going to be differentiated, because at the end of the day, they will be prepared for one assessment that doesn't allow for much differentiation. So these things ought to be considered when we are preparing teachers for their assessment responsibilities. The next issue that I will focus on is unresponsive assessment. And in terms of unresponsive assessment, consider one of the things that all these innovations that have come out in teaching and learning have in common. And I also heard Dr. Manning talk about one of the challenges is the slow adoption of new ways of teaching and learning. Alternative assessment, both colleagues have shared about its importance. Education for sustainable development is something that we have committed to for Vision 2020. Formative assessment. Constructivism is something that we've spoken about from 50 years ago. Social and emotional learning is also something that is coming up. What do they all have in common? We have a positive perception of them, but inadequate implementation. So we all think that these things are good, but when we do the research to see what is happening in the classrooms and on the ground, not so much of it is being seen. So I have proposed that assessment rather, must be used to drive curriculum change. We have an adage in measurement that what gets measured gets done. What gets measured and fed back with feedback gets done well. What gets rewarded gets repeated rather. So what do we do? Now, I've written 2 papers that show how the existing assessment system, specifically that as used by the CXC, where they have traditional assessment in paper 1 and paper 2, but alternative assessment in paper 3, though that system can be repurposed to measure sustainable development competence And if it does measure sustainable development competence, because teachers fashion their classroom activities from these tests, then, and we call that teaching to the test, and we sometimes demonize teaching to the test, but teaching to the test is not a bad thing if the test reflects the competencies that we want our students to develop in the first place. There's a difference between cloning items and repeated drilling and planning your curriculum based on the content of the test. So if the test content is used to plan the curriculum down the line, then we can repurpose teaching to the test to see these developments that we want to see in our education system. People often think of assessment as the end of teaching and learning, but assessment can also be the beginning. Because we know where we're going, which is the assessment, we have now come to what are the outcomes of teaching? What should we do in the classroom to make sure that the students are adequately prepared? So we need to really repurpose and rethink the role of assessment and how it can be used to drive curriculum change. Another thing that we can look at is the key performance indices for schools and teachers. As I said, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So if we want teachers to develop assessment competencies, then we can reward them when they demonstrate these competencies. So we can look at the instruments that are used to assess schools as well as teachers. The NEI, for example, can look at its instruments to see, in terms of assessment, are we seeing alternative assessment being done properly? Are we seeing constructivism being done properly? If what we want is reflected in these instruments, then more teachers will be engaged in doing these things. Another thing that I can't complete without talking about is technology and assessment, and my colleagues have talked about it. And I will now just briefly get into it. We started with traditional assessment back when the Chinese used our traditional pen and paper standardized tests to select persons for public sector work. Based on the deficiencies, and colleague Faulkner would have talked about in terms of alternative assessment can more readily assess other skills like practical skills. Writing about how you would drive a car is different from actually driving a car on the road with the trucks coming at you, the bad drivers, the taxi drivers, and all of those things. So writing about it is completely different from being able to do it. So because of the discontent and the limitations of traditional assessment, we saw policy shifts to alternative assessment. However, based on a study I did in 2022, looking at the assessment strategies and tools used by Jamaican teachers, most of our teachers are still predominantly using tests. Why? Because we have school policies that says that students must be tested, because they think they're fashioning a standardized assessment that focuses a lot on traditional assessment. But the role of the standardized test developer and the role of the classroom teacher in terms of assessment are different. But it doesn't stop there. When you look at AI, here comes AI. And AI has made this thing a little bit more complicated, because in some quarters, we are seeing that persons are saying we should move back to traditional assessment in order to maintain the quality in assessment. Again, the concern is that because we have alternative assessment, which oftentimes requires students to complete tasks outside of the classroom, and because we know that they can get help from parents, from companies that are set up to complete, for example, the SBAs, and now we have the added challenge of AI that can generate original content that we can't trace back to plagiarism. Some persons are saying that if we go back to traditional assessment, at least we will have greater control, and we will be sure that the scores generated from the assessment are indeed reflective of the student's competence and not the competence of a machine in this case. Now, of course, I'm not in support of this recommendation, although I understand its appeal. So what I'm proposing, or what we do propose at the UWI and in the School of Education, is not going back to traditional assessment, and it's not a zero tolerance on AI either. It's promoting ethical and responsible use of AI. And I'm pleased that colleagues from CXC and CCCJ have indicated that they are working on or has already established an AI policy. And importantly, Mr. Cox would have highlighted that Gen AI, generative AI content, is not the same as plagiarism, although some persons have used their plagiarism rules to capture that as well. What we want to do is establish policy. If we have clear guidelines as to what is considered to be acceptable use of AI and unacceptable use of AI, then we can go about saying what are the consequences for the unacceptable use. We also need to inform students of the policy and provide training on academic integrity. If students know or are empowered to say, okay, I don't want to compromise myself by doing something I ought not to be doing. But in this era where there, in many institutions, not an established policy, students are operating without knowing quite what it is that they ought not to be doing. So the policy will go a far way in ensuring that. We also want to train teachers for their roles in quality assurance. If we are supposed to be using alternative assessment, and for example, CXC relies on the teachers in the classroom to ensure that the work the teacher submits on behalf of the student has actually been completed by the student, then it means that teachers ought to be aware that they're not just marking, they're not just submitting their students' grade, they're also acting as quality assurers for the standardized examination body. Because when they submit that work, they are certifying that it is the student's work. And if they're not sure, then there should be clear policy guidelines that they ought not to. Teachers can have students complete the work in class, do drafts, other things they can do to ensure the quality of these assessments. You can also use counteracting AI technology. It's an AI, it's a technology race. They talk about the arms race, it's a technology race. In the same way that persons who are developing Gen AI softwares are every day working on improving it. So today we say that AI can't measure this. Well, when you say that, then the developer is going to ensure it can. Well, it's the same way on the other side. When you say it can't detect it because of X, then they now go up and develop something else. So we have to be mindful that there are softwares out there that you can use. And we also need to change our assessment sample. Paul would have mentioned that content is out there on the internet. So we can't be focused on content generation. We need to focus on the higher order thinking skills. So one of the skills that you saw I mentioned earlier was creativity. Creativity is still important. And what Gen AI does is not creative in an original sense. It is actually pulling together everybody else's work and presenting a summary of that in a new form, but not generating a new idea. So we have to be mindful of that, as well as I've used AI with my students and shown them that without the necessary knowledge of how to use the AI, as well as to critique the output from Gen AI, they could run into some serious problems of submitting substandard work. So we need to change our assessment sample from focusing on the lower order thinking skills that can easily be regurgitated from the internet to something that really needs analytical skills that our students need to actually demonstrate that they have. Now, I want to encourage everybody to be flexible. What works today might change tomorrow. What works this year might change next year. So we have to stay in the know and reflect, react, and sometimes be proactive as these things happen. And that's where I'm going to end. And I look forward to the conversations later on. Thank you. And as I said, let's continue the conversation after the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clavia Williams-McBean. I didn't mention that she's coordinator of the undergraduate program at the School of Education in the faculties of Humanities and Education. And she is also a lecturer in educational measurement and a consultant at CXC. And so we've received a wealth of knowledge from Dr. McBean today. We've really learned a lot about the research as it pertains to assessment. And we thank her for pointing out that one of the key things we have to focus on is our teacher preparation. If it's inadequate, then it means that our teachers will not be able to construct assessment items appropriately. They will not be able to do differentiated assessment. So we talk about differentiated instruction. What about differentiated assessment? Very important that as they prepare students for the Caribbean Examination Council exams, they are able to properly guide them in their school-based assessments. And one of the things that stood out for me is the fact that current item formats and assessment systems can be optimized to measure sustainable development competencies. Everybody's talking about the sustainable development goals. Just last week, along with Trenchtown Polytechnic College, we hosted a conference looking at sustainable development. And so it is critical that we understand the role of assessment in all of this. And she also reiterated some of what the other presenters have stated as it pertains to ethical AI. So we have to be flexible, willing to change, willing to focus on the HOTS, the higher thinking skills. Thank you so much, Dr. McBean, and we look forward to discussing further with you when we are at our panel discussion. And so we're getting some comments there in the chat, very insightful and in-depth presentation, Dr. McBean, excellent presentation. And of course, we've been getting comments as well on the other presentations, great presentations. We thank you. We look forward now to hearing from Miss Sandra Richards, and she is from the Excelsior Community College. And today, she will be presenting to us on the topic, key components on reliable and valid assessment practices. And I know how passionate she is about this topic. I know about her passion as it pertains to getting it right to ensure that we can do what we ought to do appropriately as far as assessment is concerned. She's the acting dean of the Center of Curriculum Development, Teaching and Learning at Excelsior Community College, and she's also a doctoral candidate in educational measurement at the University of the West Indies. Her research interests include validity, alignment, and assessment for certification purposes, curriculum design and development for certification, teacher education, and quality assurance in education. And she has a lot of experience as it pertains to standards committees when it comes on to developing generic standards for bachelor's, associates, and occupational degrees. She has done a wealth of work with the UCJ, and she also helped to develop the standards and guidelines for micro-credentials. And so at this time, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, show some love to Ms. Sandra Richards as she comes to us to speak about key components as far as reliability and validity are concerned in our assessment practices. Welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, colleagues. And can you confirm you're seeing my screen?
We can confirm that we're seeing you.
Not my screen?
No, you'd have to share. I don't think it's been shared.
Okay, are you with me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Good morning again, colleagues. You know, in any conversation around assessment, I usually ask, assessment is the answer, but what is the question? Now, in any discussion about assessment, we must first understand that assessment exists in a network of activities that work together to achieve a specific purpose. The assessment system uses instruments called tests to collect information or collect data that is analyzed and used to make some claims and decisions about students, programs, and institutions. Now, in higher education, in the system, programs generally prepare students for work. And the claim is usually that once a student graduates from a higher education institution, then they're ready for work. The competencies that define readiness for work are usually outlined in the curriculum, which is the pedagogical contract between an institution and its students. The competencies are usually communicated this way. At the end of this program or at the end of this course, students should be able to do something. These competencies provide the basis for claims made about student readiness for work. So for example, an institution may claim via their graduate profile that our students are problem solvers and critical thinkers. The dimension of competence that is sought is problem solving and critical thinking skills. And the claim is that the graduate is a problem solver and a critical thinker. In a quality assurance system, it's also the hypothesis that you test. You look at all the evidence that the institution presents to determine whether the graduate is a problem solver and critical thinking. If that hypothesis is not supported, there's flaw in the process, there's flaw in the product, the test item, the test instrument as a product, then the null hypothesis will be true. This graduate is not a problem solver and critical thinker. Also, in the course and the course level learning outcomes, you will have an objective that says at the end of this course, students should be able to design and develop a curriculum for an identified need, and the same exists, or same applies. Therefore, another competence that would define the students' readiness for work would be, can they design and develop a curriculum for an identified need? So the institution would make the claim that this student on graduation has this skill, all right? And in that way, the quality assurance process, these claims become the hypothesis to be tested to ensure that the test measures what it says it measures. Now, assessment for credentialing purposes is different from other assessment in that the purpose is to protect the public from people who are not yet ready for practice. And this is outlined in the professional testing standards. I have pictures of two of them here, the English version and the Spanish version. All right. So assessment used for credentialing purpose is expected to adhere to professional testing standards so that the scores are fit for purpose and the claims and decisions they support are legally defensible. From the latest edition of the professional testing standard, it was printed in 2014. It's printed once every 15 years, but COVID interrupted, so there's one outstanding. So they're pictured here, as I said. We understand that the best practices include the following. The focus of credentialing test is on candidates' competence in a specified domain. So the assessment must be informed by a job analysis that identifies the task and the responsibilities critical to the profession being studied. For assessment to be a reliable source of information on which to base its competency claims and credentialing decisions, the curriculum must develop the knowledge, skills, and judgments that are needed for workplace practice. In quality assurance of assessment for credentialing purposes, the most important evidence to be investigated is the evidence of content relatedness, and that is the extent to which the test aligns with the constructs or the competence that the test is intended to measure. And I use test and assessment interchangeably here. The adequacy of the coverage of the learning outcomes specified by the curriculum and the appropriateness of the content that addresses the learning outcomes. Therefore, the curriculum must play an important role in any discussion about assessment, and as the curriculum's quality determines the assessment quality. Good quality assessment cannot test for problem solving and critical thinking skills if meeting the curriculum outcomes does not require the activation of problem solving and critical thinking skills. Good assessment cannot use AI tools or creative methods of assessment if the curriculum objectives do not support these tools or methods. Now, in adhering to best practices, higher education institutions must declare the purpose of assessment. What claims and decisions will the results be used to support? That is important. And then they need to also ensure that the curriculum is trying to develop the skills and the competencies that are necessary to support these claims and decisions. They also must ensure that their documentary proof supports efforts to adhere to professional testing standards, and they must ensure that the quality assurance policies are carefully described and the qualifications and the experience of the people involved are documented. These are part of the network of evidence to be interrogated in a quality assurance exercise. They also must ensure that there's a distinction between the purpose of credentialing assessment and assessment for other purposes, including classroom assessment. As Clavia explained, there's a close link between classroom assessment and student learning. In credentialing, what is expected is that at the end of the process, the students are prepared or ready for work. All right. So remember, if higher education institutions prepare people for work, then assessment must test critical workplace competencies to protect the public from people who are not yet ready for practice. Assessment also protects the public from people who are not yet ready for practice when a test score is a reliable indicator of the student's competence with the knowledge, skills, and judgment required for effective workplace practice. Assessment tools and methods that do not support the purpose of assessment may result in unintended consequences. The certification of people who are not yet ready for practice, the certification of people who are incompetent practitioners. That is my contribution to the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so we've really been given some points here for consideration. We must differentiate between assessments that are formative and those that are summative, those that are developed for credentialing. For instance, they must adhere to the professional standards. They must cover the learning outcomes appropriately. And of course, our curricula and our learning outcomes must be in line, and our assessment must also be in line with our curricula and learning outcomes. And this is something that we learned early on. And for those of us who've studied education, that everything must be in a straight line. So you cannot be testing for what you have not taught. That is not ethical. And so thank you so much. I'm going to invite to join me for this section. We're now at the panel discussion section, and I'm going to invite Mr. Denworth Finnekin to join me.
Good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are hearing you. All right. And so Mr. Finnekin has been listening keenly, and he has some questions. And so, Mr. Finnekin, I'm going to allow you to start with your questions for the panelists. I'm going to invite all our panelists to turn on their videos so that we can see you. And I'm just going to ask that if they can be pinned so that they can be easily seen by our audience watching.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. I think we had some wonderful presentations. I'm sure those who are in attendance would have been edified by the various presentations. You know, the time seems so short. But let me ask a question. Ms. Sandra Richards or Dr. Clavia McBean or even Mr. Paul Fox may take this one. What are some of the biggest challenges facing assessment in higher education today? What would you consider some of the biggest challenges facing assessment in higher education today?
Okay, can I take that one? Let me start off. I think Clavia said it. One of the problems we have, maybe the biggest one, is the ability of our teachers to two things. Ability of the teachers to I'm trying to be very careful how I say this, but really to analyze and interpret our objectives on our curriculum. And I go back a little bit to I think there may be a problem with us asking our teachers to develop the curriculum that is intended to develop workplace skills. I think there needs to be greater involvement between the curriculum developers and members of the industry. At Excelsior, we have a practice. Our curriculum department engages practitioners. So if we recently developed a postgraduate diploma for teacher education. And what we did, the curriculum developers interface with the people in practice. We're developing the curriculum, we say to them, give me 5 skills. If teachers don't have these 5 skills in assessment, you would not employ them, right? So we get it from there. Of course, the teachers who are going to be implementing the curriculum do participate, but we start out with what obtains in the industry and find out if there's a gap between what he obtains in the education industry in the classroom in Jamaica and what is current practice. And then we have training for the teachers to address that gap. And then after that, now you have the challenge of interpreting those objectives and developing items to test for workplace skills.
Thank you. Thank you.
I agree with
Dr. Clevey, I'm sure you want to comment on this.
Sure. I agree with Sandra there. It's a skill. It's really a skill to interpret your objectives for assessment purposes, and that's one of the assessments that I give to my students at the undergraduate level, and they always struggle with it because yes, you're given objectives in a syllabus, maybe from CXC or the ministry, and then you go about teaching. But then when you are supposed to convert that into what items, at what level the items. So we find that in preparation, students get some understanding. When they get into the field, they're not required to create a table of specification. So even when we have teachers returning and we're saying develop a table of specification, they're saying, but we don't have to do this when we're creating tests. We find a test on the internet and we probably switch some things. But I'm saying, how do you know that the test that you found on the internet is actually measuring what you taught in your classroom? It's a critical skill that you need to know, analyze what items
you giving, Mr. Walker. What kind of trouble you giving?
Oh,
And Nathalie Staines, your audio is on.
The items we have on our instruments with our objectives. Added to that, I think at our level, the biggest challenge for us right now is really AI. And we have to balance or need to have our students engage in alternative assessment, especially since we are developing professional competencies. Teaching is a skill. It's not just cognitive. You have to actually practice and do it. So we need different types of assessment. But then when we have our portfolios and our projects and all these wonderful things that are intended to develop these competencies and students can use AI to generate, then we are tasked with determining, do the students really have these competencies? And so for us, definitely, we are not certifying students who know how to use the AI. That's another course probably in computer science or if we're teaching IT education, but we want to know. So as I said, the most important thing for us is that our students have the requisite competencies. So we have implemented strategies to make sure that at the end of the day, we are still certifying students and not machines. The specific challenge that AI poses, I should say, is that it's not generating content that you can find on the internet existing in the same way somewhere else. And that's the misconception that many people don't understand. That is why it's not plagiarism. So it's difficult for you to spot exactly where this is coming from because it's not coming from any one thing. It's coming from a summary of everything that exists on the internet. So you have to have mechanisms in place, not just for plagiarism, which is copying. This is not copying, this is generating. So that's a challenge. And as I said, I'll stop here so that Paul can jump in if he wants to.
Yes, just to quickly add though, one of the challenges that we're having with assessment in higher ed is the heavily reliance on what's already obtained. So past papers, item banks, etc., faculty continues to access what obtains already as opposed to developing new and ingenious, authentic assessments that our students can take and utilize. I don't know if it's a fail-safe or whether it is that they lack the necessary competence to sit and develop colleagues writing one single item that sticks to measurement principles and assessment principles takes hours, weeks, months, one singular item. So the current conversation about a divergence from traditional assessment to authentic assessment, it bodes well. Because here it is not, we are now able to mirror what happens in the industry and fashion and form an assessment piece that the students can write on spot, develop, they can be assessed and evaluated and a score assigned as opposed to the heavy reliance on what currently obtains. I think that is one of our largest challenges in terms of the reliance on what exists because it is easy. And I think we now need to be forward thinkers and to move away from that current practice.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd love to hear Dr. Manning, and then you can come in again, Mr. Paul Cox, on this. How can institutions leverage AI to enhance personal learning while maintaining academic integrity? How can institution, utilize AI to enhance the personal learning while maintaining academic integrity? Dr. Clavia McBean, I think, put it very well, that it's generative information, not information that exists elsewhere, but to how, there are certain institutions or lecturers at the higher level, at the higher education institutions, that tend to tell their students not to use AI. But how can institutions leverage AI to enhance personalized learning while maintaining academic integrity? Dr. Manning and possible Mr. Cox, and if you want to come in again, Flavia, that would be great.
All right, thank you for the question. This is something that we would have considered in developing our own AI policy framework, as well as what we're looking at as we develop our standards and guidelines for AI. One of the things at the top of our list is the preservation of academic integrity. And as it would have been said many times, it's not plagiarism alone. Plagiarism is a component of academic integrity. But because of what generative AI brings to the table, it almost it weakens the argument a lot regarding plagiarism, because it is not taking that information necessarily. And in some cases now we see a little referencing going on. However, the consciousness of the fact that it's weak is the first point, right? There are biases. That's another point that you need to understand. Persons are using the AI, but they're not understanding what are the inherent issues with it. And so that's why at the council, we are even encouraging the use of to ensure authentic assessment. And it is something, as you noticed in my list that I had in terms of the performance-based assessment, because it is a part of what we encourage for school-based assessment. And we do say to our teachers, we're encouraging them, especially at the CAPE level, when we know studies have explained and outlined, and that when they do well at the CAPE level, they naturally do well at university, at the tertiary level. So it is important to ensure that we harness these higher level cognitive skills. But in relation to the preservation is as one component, but a big component also is ethics. One of the problems we have is there's a little inequity, and that's one of the concerns we have also, and something for the Ministry of Education to look at. When we rolled out for digital transformation, and I'm separating the two, when we rolled out in 2017, we'd have been doing e-assessment from then. You had, of course, the inequity in terms of the availability of the infrastructure. So some places in the region have that balance and some no. And so with that inequity, the same exists for AI, where you do not have the necessary infrastructure in place and so on. And so on that basis, we are saying to the teachers and saying to the ministries of education, create that level of equity by providing the infrastructure and the resources for all students. We are not against AI, we are embracing, and that's why I placed that in the presentation, embracing the AI, but in context. It's very important we understand that context. And so when I speak about the ethics and we speak about curriculum integration in our policy and all of that, what we're saying is the teachers getting that training and professional development, all of that are components of, as you said, personalized learning. We are expecting the teachers to hone those skills and to make it a part of the process. We are seeking to do a conference this year to ensure that we really drive that home and help assist in terms of educational professional development, because that personal component you mentioned about personal learning, it can only happen, and I'm sure Dr. McBean, who really has to treat with this particular component, will tell you that it is something that it has to be practicable. Yeah, something that persons have to really utilize. I want to, however, note in terms of the academic integrity, because it's something we struggle with and issues we have, and it's not because of AI. Colleagues, I don't want us to believe that this academic integrity issue is because of AI. It existed before, and the struggles we have, unfortunately, we have to remember that it's not only the teachers, it's a combination of persons who are in the community that we have to work with. There's another whole discussion about academic integrity and ethics and all of that. Lastly, when we speak about the personal learning tool, another component we want to look at is the fact that our teachers in developing in their own space, they have to allow the students to utilize the system and do their own development. There is a strategy we use in terms of the candidates almost being the teachers, and where they are allowed to use any assessment strategy that is best suited. And anybody who's in assessment will tell you this. You are assessing the learning outcome, you have to use the best assessment strategy that is applicable for that particular outcome for us to realize those results. And that is where we have to move away from just the traditional regurgitation of an essay. And like we do for some of our components, like communication studies, we ask that the candidates do a presentation. So you allow them to use the AI, but you allow them also to do the analytical work in terms of what is required. Because the truth is, when you're employed, people are going to be using AI. But that's not what you're using to prepare. However, when you're actually doing your analysis and presentation to your boards and so on, you have to do that kind of presentation, the analytical work that is required and those skills. And that's why we created the skills and competency framework, because we wanted everything that we do to be benchmarked on that. I'll stop there, but I will just say I'm encouraging the candidate, the teachers, and I would say facilitators in relation to the personal learning in line with academic integrity.
Thank you. 90 seconds for you, Dr. Clavia, and 90 seconds for you, Paul.
So in 90 seconds, there are a few strategies that you can use to encourage teachers or institutions to utilize AI. To promote formative assessment. It can be used there because the grading at that point is not a demonstration, a final evaluation of their competence. We can use it for content generation. So if you're struggling to come up with an exciting activity, go to AI and ask it to help you to Okay, ideation. I use it for my students in terms of when they're stuck with thinking about what their research problem is. I said, go and type out what are the gaps in research related to your field. In terms of reliability, the grader function can be used to assess papers. So the teacher assesses, they use AI to assess and see to what extent are the scores in alignment. And finally, to demonstrate critical thinking skills, I have my students generate items through the AI and then critique it, because one of the things they don't realize is that because AI generated doesn't mean that it's the best thing. You can't underestimate your own critical thinking skills and the skills that we are preparing you for. So you can look at the item now and say, no, it's flawed because you know the item analysis rules, you know the item construction rules. And that's it for me.
Thank you.
Quickly from me though, a recent publication by Madden et al. This is actually 2024. That team looked on AI use and understanding within the higher education sector here in Jamaica. I think the sample size was a very small sample size, and they questioned the faculty with respect to their knowledge in terms of artificial intelligence use in course delivery and in assessment. And from what was gleaned in terms of results, their Clavia probably is in the minority with how it is that she's able to incorporate it within her lessons. But from that study, across higher education sector here in Jamaica, faculty are not familiar and have not been using it in their classroom spaces. So when Dr. Manning indicated in terms of professional capacity building, it has to be higher on the food chain. When she also talks about personal learning, we oftentimes find faculty relaxed and not wanting to agitate and engage themselves without trying to check a box to say, okay, I'm going to do this professional development, I'm going to do that. If it doesn't come from the university, it doesn't come from the colleges, I'm not doing it. So you find that there's a reluctance in faculty trying to invest in themselves and to take ownership of their own professional learning and upskilling. And I just want to share this, colleagues. It may steer another conversation and another debate, but we have to be honest with ourselves that our current education paradigm is heavily reliant on passing, is heavily reliant on that first-class honors or that distinction. To a lesser extent, the capacity of the student, that when that student leaves the four pillars or the four corners of the university or the college, we now need to focus less on the scores and the interpretations of the scores. And mark it is also important, but we also need to focus on the skills that our students are leaving our classroom spaces on. And I believe artificial intelligence, it is marketed as a co-pilot. It's marketed as a co-pilot because the pilot, in truth and in fact, is the human element. So we ought to augment it and to include it in our spaces, but the human is the more knowledgeable other. And that is what Clavia and Dr. Manning, they have been alluding to. We have the technical skills and the technical know-how and the technical understanding of the output that it produces. We can discern, we can measure the fine gradations between truth and fiction. And I think the human element has to be strengthened, and AI is used simply as a passenger as we drive education.
Thank you. Thank you. We're soliciting questions from the chat. Mrs. Seymour Hall will take those.
Okay, thank you so much. And so we have some comments that I want everybody to hear. Looking at developing curricula in tandem with others, not doing it alone. Collaboration, do we have sufficient collaboration? And we're getting that from Kareem Russell and Deidre Bailey, looking at how we are working collaboratively in terms of our assessment. And we also have a great point here from Hugh Duffus. He says that he sees great potential in AI-powered chatbots for interactive oral assessments. They can simulate real-world scenarios, challenge students with adaptive communication, clarity, and critical thinking with instant feedback. This approach enhances engagement and prepares students for professional interactions. And a lot of agreement with him there. And so he really spoke about ensuring that we are testing the understanding to contextualize and so on. And someone mentioned the fact, let me see, who is this here now? This is Deidre Bailey, that technology is very important, that it's a part of your personal learning kit. And Farah mentions that it is very important that we integrate AI using the advantages as best as possible to help our students as they seek to participate in our lessons. And oh yes, I see Dr. Williams McBean responded there. So quite an interesting conversation going on then work in our chat. And one person is asking, how can we be assured that AI is being used acceptably? I'm sure that your question was answered based on what our presenters have been saying, right, Denworth? That question has been answered by our presenters.
I think so. When I saw that comment, though, I said there should be a part 2 to this, where we'll get the policyholders for the country to. And there's a committee that is looking at how digital skills and AI should be implemented in Jamaica. So it's consideration there for another presentation like this, another webinar. But let me ask Ingrid Faulkner and Ms. Sandra Richards could comment on this. How well do current assessment practices align with the evolving skills and competencies required in the labor market? You know, how well do current assessment practices align with the evolving skills and competencies required in the labor market?
All right, so I will go. Well, at the NCT vet, what we do, or qualification, is developed alongside the industry. And so industry plays a critical role from the beginning of the process through to assessment. Now, when it is that assessments are done or to be done, we use the industry to assist us through development of assessments. They do on-the-job assessments. They partner with us to do on-the-job assessments. And so that is how we do the assessment with labor market. And so as a result, they are able to tell us what their needs are. And so we are able to tailor accordingly.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Richards, you want to comment on that?
I say that we're not sure. We honestly are not, because we don't do validation studies of our assessment. We do not, and that is the standard says that when we do these things, including setting the pass mark for our assessment, we need to use people who with the right qualification, training, and experience to do that. We're not doing much of that, so we can't tell. However, in instances where we say we do and we get industry people, the industry people may not be au fait with the assessment requirements, what it is that makes a good assessment. So you get something that looks nice, but when you look at it, you find that it is not aligned. So for instance, we will say somebody, yes, we must take workplace skills. And we're testing if the student can analyze something. Student must be able to analyze the difference between a pen and a pencil. But analyzing requires the use of a certain set of skills, all right? But there's nothing to analyze between a pen and pencil. You can take it up and look at it and tell the difference. We're not doing that kind of analysis with our assessment, and therefore the real thing is that although we say we do, we are not sure.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Paul Cox to comment on this. He did mention tracer study a lot. And I don't know if it is that you'd want to comment on how well, the college's assessment practices align with the evolving skills and competence required by labor market.
Thank you, Sir Finnegan. The truth is, we have not been aligning our assessment practices with what's obtained in the labor market. So when we receive the reports here at the Secretariat, there is almost a howling to say, boy, your students have the grades, the scores look good, but I have to do so much in terms of training them to effectively carry out aspects of their job description, which is why here at the Secretariat, we have now been actively pursuing, actively engaging subject matter experts across the divide so as to ensure that there is seamless articulation and seamless matching with what happens in the classroom space and what the students therefore goes out and practice. We have not been sufficiently able to do that. And as such, it is our primary mantra now to ensure that there is strict alignment between assessment and the labor market needs.
Thank you.
Mr. Finnegan, can I just give me 30 seconds? The biggest challenge we have in that fight is our struggle, is that we have curricula in the higher ed that really, if you look at the objective, they really require the use of low order skills. List the advantage and disadvantage of this, state this, explain this, and even if we use the higher order verbs, the use of it in the context in which the objectives are written does not require the use of higher order skills. And so if we are going to be testing workplace skills, you're going to find that it's not going to be aligning with the curriculum because the curriculum does not require the use of those skills. And I think that is our biggest challenge.
Wow.
Mr. Finnegan, if it's possible, can I just weigh in on this one?
Yes, Dr. Manning.
Because it is something that we have, we are looking at it, deeper research in this area. But to get the information from industry to ensure that what your outputs are and the alignment through curriculum is also something that you have to consider. Because remember, the fact that you have to work as an educator with persons who are looking at what the industry requires from a different perspective. So the standards and the translation of those to curriculum, which is why we say that the national curriculum is one, but the regional qualification is another. And so it is of utmost importance to us because we want to know that what we are providing in terms of the output and what you are having as the input. And as I think Ms. Richards mentioned, that cyclical component. I'm not sure if Ms. Richards or Matt Bean had mentioned it, but it is a reality in assessment. And so that little bit there in terms of the labor market demand and what is actually provided by the industry is another thing why I mentioned about partnerships being so important.
Okay, thank you. Well, time is really going, but let me ask, based on what the response to that question, may I ask, and maybe more now for suggestions, as to how can higher level or higher education institutions effectively implement non-traditional assessments? Because I think these non-traditional assessments would align more to the requirements of the labor market. So the question is, how can higher education institutions effectively implement non-traditional assessments such as, project-based, competency-based, portfolio assessment? I don't know. We could take a minute from each, and then I'll turn over to Mrs. Hall.
Can I go first? Because for me, what we need to do before we start talking about the assessment is understand that it does not exist by itself. It's part of a system which must begin with the curriculum. What is the outcome do we need from our program? Not just the output, but how you're going to use it. How does it align with what we want? So what is the outcome that you need, and plan the curriculum like that? Because Mr. Finnegan, if we continue to speak about assessment and divorce it from curriculum, we're going to be in problems. Because what we're going to end up with, we're focusing on assessment, and that's why we focus so much on tests. What to do with the test score? We want to pass. We don't want to learn because the curriculum does not require learning. And that's where we need to start. Ensure, because if you have a curriculum that is designed to develop the workplace skill, the students will learn it. And so we wouldn't have to worry about the assessment. The assessment is planned as part of the curriculum design and development process.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, go ahead. I agree with Sandra, but I kind of differ in some instances. I don't think that the curriculum must always drive the assessment. I think the assessment can also drive the curriculum, which is the argument I make in that. So if we design the assessment to reflect the curricular outcomes that we want to see, and especially if these assessments are high stakes assessment, it will move the curriculum in the direction we want it to go. And certainly I've seen that happen. When CXC introduced the school-based assessment, which required students to speak in English, speaking, which was a neglected component in teaching of English, now became so critical that we had teachers having sessions where they taught students how to speak in English. So that's an example of how assessment drove innovation in the curriculum. Now, and we can use that for all the other things that we want to see, which is what I'm proposing. Another thing is, I don't want us to think of testing as bad. No assessment method is inherently bad or good. They're all complementary and necessary for different things. And in any competence that you can think of, which is another argument I made, there is a knowledge component, there is a practical component, there's a social and emotional component. So what we need is design a system that can accurately reflect that. And as I said, the CXC system is a good one to model. What we need to do is to make sure that the model is actually achieving what it does. So what Sandra says is that using higher order verb doesn't mean that it's a higher order objective. We actually have to make sure that we're requiring the competencies that are suitable for measurement using alternative assessment. And that's what I'll say.
Thank you.
If I just follow up on what Clavia mentioned just now, so she would have said some of what I would have wanted to make in terms of the traditional versus the non-traditional. I mentioned about the inquiry-based learning and the utilization of assessment strategies suitable for assessment of, as, and for. And sometimes we are not so dedicated or specific or deliberate, that's the word I'm looking for, in terms of assessment as and assessment for learning. We do assessment of learning very easily, and that's something that we do all the time. But the other two, they are just as important. That's number one. So number two, actually, because the inquiry-based learning and assessment is another thing we are also encouraging. Thirdly, in relation to the more non-traditional type of assessment, what we're looking at too is how we are mirroring what we do for the SBA and how we have that on the paper 3. So like, for example, those private candidates who do that paper 3, changing how that looks and mirroring it to what you would normally have in an alternate assessment is something that we are assessing. And we are finding, for the most part, what we have looked at, that is also very good, because it is making sure that we create that real world, what we are talking about, the authentic assessment, making sure that it mirrors assessment. Now, somebody mentioned the cost and the fact that it takes a lot of time, but it is worth it because of what we're going to achieve in the end. And research will tell us.
Thank you.
Just my quick 2 cents. I think for a lot of us in education, our mindset has to change. There are a lot of persons with a fixed mindset, and our education system, in truth and in fact, really hasn't evolved to really match the growing 21st century needs. So we have the conversation about a fixed mindset vis-a-vis a growth mindset. And I believe within the halls of our training institutions that the philosophy of education has to be flipped. And until that happens and then everything else follows suit, we will continuously be chasing our tails. When we have professional development sessions and we share with faculty, okay, we are going to be developing authentic assessments, etc., because of the difficulty and because of the cognitive skills that is required to develop that, you find that a lot of academics and a lot of teachers, lecturers resort to their fail-safe in terms of just, in their minds, writing a multiple choice question, writing a structured piece, and call that assessment. It requires a lot more of us, a lot more skills and competencies to really sit and develop, ideally, an authentic piece. And I think from our training institutions, teacher training institutions or higher education institutions, the philosophy has to change from there, because we are continuously churning out the same product and expecting different results. And as such, I don't see it happening until we change the philosophy of education here in Jamaica.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Hall, you don't want to come in here?
Okay, thank you so much. And we have one final question, but just before I ask that question, I want to remind you that there's an evaluation form, only 5 questions. It's in the chat, and we'll share it again if necessary. 1 optional quiz question, and the first person to complete the quiz correctly, we have a gift for you. So please share your email in the quiz section if you're participating. So we look forward to that. And the final question through you, Mr. Finnegan, is, are there systematic barriers in assessment for marginalized groups? And how do we overcome those? That's the final question.
I'll take that one. Yes, there are systematic barriers. The Jamaica TVET system, led by NC TVET and Heart NSTA Trust, evaluate learners based on demonstrated skills rather than traditional standardized tests. And this benefits marginalized groups by allowing learners to be assessed at their own pace, offer multiple opportunities to prove competence and reduce pressure, and ensure practical hands-on evaluation, which benefits learners with limited academic backgrounds. But more importantly, we have the PLR, prior learning assessment and recognition, which enables individuals such as informal workers, school dropouts, and those with prior experience to gain certification on their existing skills. And it reduces systematic barriers by recognizing these skills gained outside of formal education, example through work experience or even apprenticeships. And it also offers a flexible pathway which benefits marginalized learners who may not have formal qualification. I'd also look at rural and low-income student support, where marginalized youth in the rural areas face challenges related to assessment centers, financial constraint, and even digital literacy. And so Jamaican TVET system tackles that or try to get through that by community-based assessment centers, which is through the community-based training interventions. They also have mobile units, which bring certification opportunities to remote areas. I'll stop there and anyone else can weigh in.
All right, I can add my 2 cents. Certainly, I think there are systematic problems, issues that we have to overcome in terms of marginalized group for persons with disability and others. Now, for persons with disability, I know we make accommodations. So for CXC, for example, and even at the UWI, we have an office dedicated to providing assistance. So
Center for Disabilities.
So if the student requires a writer, for example, or somebody to read for them, and I've used that facility for students in my classroom. But the barrier, I think, where that is concerned is that students need to be formally assessed before they can access the service. And the formal assessment is expensive, as well as there is a long waiting list as to when you can be assessed. So while you wait, you can get through the entire system. Right now, if you call the available centers in Jamaica, they might tell you that you have a date in 2027. So it's a real barrier. But outside of that, there are personal barriers as well, because parents and students don't want to be tested to see if they have some sort of challenge that can prevent them. And even if they are assessed, they're not sharing the results so they can get the necessary assistance. So it's not just on the side of what is provided vis-a-vis the government, but it's also the start of education that we have to give parents and students that having a disability is not so much of a barrier or something to be stigmatized or be ashamed of. It's something for us all to acknowledge that it exists and access the support that is there to help these students.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I can just give my probably 1 cent here.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So we tend to prefer to look at it as exceptionalities on both ends. So you have those more advanced and those on the other end. And 2 things, and then you have the typical. So and usually at the other end, what we're looking at is to create, or as you saw me present about the micro and intermediate and macro credentials, to ensure that we create a pathway that will help the persons on either end to not only create their profile, but also to do at their pace and a flexible way their qualifications that they want to achieve. So smaller bits and coming to the whole, as well as all of what Claver would have said in relation to those persons now on the other end of the spectrum, but still requiring additional assistance. What I must quickly say though is digital transformation and moving in this direction would definitely help, because readers and so on, I tell people when you do the electronic assessment and the candidates put on their headphones, they are at a greater advantage than you trying to find somebody beside them. So take, for example, English. You can't get a reader for English because the intonations and all of that can influence how the person speaks. But if we were to have a natural way of the voice in terms of the reading, that would help many more candidates. And that's why we encourage digital transformation. That's why we encourage e-assessment. So it is something that across the region, We have other methods that we're looking at too, to try and see if we can make it more accessible, but it is something that we're pushing because both ends of the spectrum needs to be dealt with. Advanced, typical, as well as those on the other side. Just wanted to say that.
Okay.
I know we had said the last question, Mrs. Seymour Hall, but I'm sure certain people would forgive me for not raising the question of prior learning. We have so many persons out there who have been working in the field, who have content, but want to transition to another area. For instance, we have people doing electrical, doing automotive, and we're short on teachers for those areas. How can higher level education institution effectively assess and recognize prior learning to ensure that some of those persons can progress and fill some of the gaps that we're having? Nadia, please allow panelists to share a point on that, because I know that that's one of J-TEC mandates also, to see how we can bring more persons into the education space. So how can we look at some of those persons and provide prior learning assessment, to get those persons on a trajectory towards achieving high-level education? I don't know who will take that. I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Clavia.
I know Sexy mentioned something about it as well.
Yes, I was going to say to you that for that to happen, Mr. Finnegan, one of the very important components is the qualification framework. So I know that CARICOM is doing some updates where that is concerned, because I think the current one is 2015 or thereabout. And
2017.
And so there is need for the first point on it is in relation to your qualification framework. The second point is that this is a costly venture. I'm steep in this area, so I know that I've been there, done that. It's very expensive, but I must say that it is something that we're looking at ourselves in relation to how do you provide that. And it's not necessarily just getting the information and assessing it from this get-go. Remember, equivalency plays a big part in PLAR. And so that's also a component of what we are looking at. It's early days, so I won't say much more.
All right, so prior learning assessment, of course, the existing strategies that we have can be used for that. Certainly, what we are looking for, because we would have already had our curriculum, what are the outcomes, the skills, the competencies that would lead to a qualification in X in a tertiary institution, for example. So we have our descriptors that say a student can receive a diploma in education if they demonstrate X, Y, and Z. But there might be a teacher who has been teaching for years without the qualification. So then we can assess that teacher to see, we can have portfolio reviews. They submit documents that are necessary for proving what particular skill or competence. We can have skill demonstration. We go and we watch them while we're teaching to see if we need to send them on additional teaching practice, for example. We can have self-assessments. We can have many different instruments that are in existence. It's about, as Dr. Manning would have indicated, matching what they now possess with what is required for the certification to see to what level they have those competencies, skills, knowledge, and then say, okay, maybe you need to do one course on X to be qualified because that's where your deficiency, based on the assessment, that's where you were lacking. So if you do this one course, you can be certified. But again, it requires flexibility. And as we're seeing, not many people can or are willing to commit to long periods of studies anymore. So this idea of a 3-year degree or a 4-year degree is quickly going out of style, right? So the micro-credentialing that Nicole spoke about, and of course, these sorts of assessment can help us because we do have people who are competent and they just don't have a paper. And they tell you that the paper is important. Yes, it is, but possessing the skill and the competence that is reflected by the paper is more important in my estimation, because if you have the paper without the skill, you still can't do the job. And that's it from me.
Thank you.
Mr. Fennikin, I'd like to interject and say how excited I am about that point, because we were recently having a discussion about the same thing. The need, right now we have a crisis where most of our teachers, particularly at the early childhood level, need formal qualification. Are we going to put them, some of them have been teaching for 30 years, 40 years, 20 years. Are we going to put them through a long, rigorous, unnecessary system, or are we going to think creatively and ensure that we can assess their prior learning and allow them to earn certifications by combining prior learning with micro-credentials and other means, looking at credit transfers as well, see how many credits they can learn on the job and how we can partner to make this a reality. So I'm very excited. Maybe I'll need to meet with Mrs. Williams, Bean, and we learn more about this. We're running out of time, but the discussion, I tell you, it's heating up. And somebody on YouTube is very strident. I'll just share this final. It's true that sometimes what they have on the job is flawed, but that is where we ensure that the portfolios are done and they get the necessary support. And that is where we ensure that they get an opportunity to demonstrate what it is that they do on a day-to-day basis. And it can be corrected and they can get some minimal intervention and micro-credentials to bring them up. So I take that comment from the chat. On YouTube, somebody is very strident, taking us back. You don't have to comment because I'm going to wrap up after this. Maybe I'll just take one 30-second comment on this. Someone from YouTube saying assessment cannot drive the curriculum. Assessment is a component of the curriculum. Assessment formats will be dictated by the curriculum design and philosophical underpinnings of the curriculum. The curriculum in higher education in Jamaica on the whole needs to change. And so I can only take about 30 or 40 seconds on that quickly. And then I'm going to go into my closing remarks.
So pretty much I will say that I agree that tertiary education curriculum needs revision. I agree with that, but I wholeheartedly disagree with the fact that assessment cannot drive the curriculum. Importantly, what we teach in the classroom is dictated by society. It's what society needs that we teach. So, as I said in the beginning of my presentation, if society needs people with sustainable development competence, we are able to create an assessment to measure sustainable development competence. And if we do, and it's a high stakes standardized exam, then you will find that teachers will now be preparing students to develop sustainable development competence. It's called a backward design, where you start from where you want to end up and design the curriculum based on where you want to go. So it can happen. It has been done before, as I've alluded to and given examples of, and outside of Jamaica, it has been done as well. So it can.
Okay, so it's a matter of what type of assessment. All right, so we're closing now. And in closing, I must say that we have seen the urgent need to ensure that our assessments can contribute to qualifications that are relevant to labor market needs and assessments that take advantage of the benefits of artificial intelligence while minimizing the risks. Our assessment culture must be built to ensure that there is buy-in from our stakeholders as it relates to areas such as assessments that support flexible learning pathways. We must improve measurement of learning by ensuring the use of tools that are valid, reliable, and also actionable. Our assessment findings cannot exist in a vacuum, but must exist to improve tertiary qualifications. We must continue to and deepen practices of tracking achievements across courses, majors, and institutions. We must commit human and financial investment as a nation to authentic assessment practices that are inexpensive and include learner feedback in a meaningful way. Where there are systematic barriers to marginal groups, these must be removed as we seek to create meaningful and aligned assessments for all our citizens, that they may possess internationally competitive and relevant qualifications in a dynamic labor market. So as we move on, we have learned so much today, and we thank each of our panelists. What a rich discussion it has been.
Indeed.
We have learned so much, and I mean, Zoom was oversubscribed. On behalf of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission then, special thank you to our guests from the CCCJ, the NCT VET, the ECC, the UE, the CXC, as well as participants who joined us from these entities. Special thanks to our parent body, MOESYI, and our higher education stakeholders who are in attendance, and I must make a special mention of the assessment bodies and stakeholders throughout the tertiary education sector, all ministries, departments, and other agencies, or higher education and training institution and leaders, or employers, or learners, or qualifications developers and designers, and special recognition to our team from J-TEC, in particularly the communications team, led by Ms. Latoya Sams Blackwood, Ms. Anthea Thompson, or NQF officer, and Dr. Black, or executive director. And as I said in my opening, as we seek to operationalize the national qualifications framework of Jamaica, our next step is ensuring that the learning outcomes, Mr. Finnekin, thank you so much, my co-host, who has really made this discussion even richer. We need to ensure that the learning outcomes that we've adopted for our national qualifications framework, those are being considered by the institutions in a serious way when they're developing their learning outcomes and subsequently their assessment, so that we can have that national assessment profile that we dream of. And in doing so, we must collaborate, we must consult our labor market. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. This has been a special experience. Goodbye.
Recording